Hello everyone and welcome back to Dreadline Stories. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. I never imagined I'd end up working nights at a self-storage facility on the outskirts of Portland. It was supposed to be a temporary gig, a way to catch up on bills while I looked for something better. The place was called West Creek Storage, one of those massive compounds with row after row of metal roll-up doors, each one with its own padlock. My job was simple. Sit in the little office, watch the monitors, do hourly rounds to make sure no one was breaking into units. The owner, Mr. Dalton, was a leathery old guy who didn't pay much but offered under-the-table cash. He also threw in a mini fridge stocked with sodas and leftover sandwiches from his wife. The first couple nights were uneventful. I'd walk the rows, listening to frogs in the drainage ditch out back, my flashlight bouncing off identical blue doors. Then one night, just after 2 a.m., I noticed something strange on the monitor that showed the back lane, the darkest part of the property where half the lights had burnt out. Unit 147's door was slightly open. I was sure it had been shut tight during my last round. I grabbed my flashlight and keys and made my way back there. The deeper into the lot I went, the quieter it got, like the night swallowed up all sound. When I reached 147, I stopped dead. The door was open by a good foot now. I shined my light inside. At first, it looked empty. Then, the beam caught on something in the corner, an old, battered recliner facing the back wall. Sitting in it was a man. He was slumped forward, chin on his chest, wearing a filthy white undershirt and jeans so worn they looked like rags. His arms dangled limply over the sides of the chair. I felt a surge of panic, thinking maybe he was dead. "Hey!" I shouted. "Facility's closed. You can't be here." The figure didn't move. I stepped closer, light trembling in my hand. That's when he slowly raised his head. His eyes were dark hollows, no glint, no white, just deep, black pits. His mouth cracked into a grin so wide it didn't look possible. Then he stood up in a jerky, almost mechanical way and took a step toward me. I bolted, ran all the way back to the office, heart hammering, locking the door behind me. On the monitor, I saw the man step out of 147, pause under the broken light, and then vanish. Just like that, he was gone. I sat there in the office for what felt like hours, staring at the screens. My heart finally started to slow down, but every time the security camera for the back lane flickered, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Eventually, around 4 a.m., I worked up the nerve to call Mr. Dalton. He answered on the third ring, sounding groggy and annoyed. When I told him what I'd seen, the open unit, the man with the hollow eyes, there was a long, unsettling silence on the other end. Then he just said, "Lock up the office. Stay inside. I'll be there by dawn." I tried to press him for more. Who was that? Was someone living in there? Should I call the cops? "No police," he snapped. Then he softened a little. "Just stay inside. I'm on my way." I hung up and backed away from the monitors, but then something caught my eye. On the feed for row C, right outside the office, the man, standing perfectly still just outside the halo of the security light, staring straight at the camera. I ducked down under the window, barely breathing. A minute passed. Then 2. When I finally peeked outside, the lot was empty. I must have dozed off at some point because I jolted awake to the sound of gravel crunching outside. It was Mr. Dalton's old pickup. He came inside looking pale, carrying a large crowbar. Without a word, he motioned for me to follow. We walked out to Unit 147 together. I expected to see it open, but it was shut tight, padlocked like nothing ever happened. Dalton sighed. "You didn't imagine it. This place has history. Goes back before I bought it. I've tried clearing that unit a dozen times, but it always comes back. The chair, the smell, sometimes even old clothes. And, sometimes him." He didn't explain who him was. Instead, he used the crowbar to pop the lock, rolled the door up, and shined a heavy-duty lantern inside. The unit was completely empty. No chair, no sign of anyone ever having been there. I turned to ask what the hell was going on, but Dalton just handed me a thick envelope. 2 weeks' pay. Don't come back. I'll find someone else. He wasn't angry, just sad, tired, like he'd been through this too many times already. I took the money and left. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I'll look up West Creek Storage on Google Maps. The street view always shows those endless rows of blue doors. But the weirdest thing? If you zoom in on Unit 147, there's a faint shadow in the doorway, like someone waiting, watching. I was nearly out of options. Student loans, credit card bills. It was all piling up so high I couldn't see over it. So when my friend Tasha told me the local 24-hour laundromat on the edge of town was hiring for night security, I jumped on it. It sounded ridiculous. Who would need security at a laundromat? But apparently, there'd been a break-in last month, plus some junkies hanging around, and the owner wanted someone to keep an eye on things from midnight to 6 a.m. The place was called Sudsville. Bright fluorescent lights inside, ugly blue and white tile floor, rows of washers and dryers that clanked and whirred all night. A little office in the back with a chair, a mini fridge, and a tiny black and white CCTV setup. Tasha worked mornings there, so she showed me how to lock up the register and gave me the Wi-Fi password. My first few nights were painfully boring. I'd bring my laptop, stream shows, and walk a lap around the machines every hour. The cameras covered every corner, so it felt pretty safe. Then came Friday night. Around 2 a.m., the door buzzed and swung open. I looked up, expecting a late-night laundry customer, but no one came in. I leaned out of the office. The front door was wide open, bells still jingling. Outside was the empty lot, puddles from the rain reflecting the bright lights. Maybe someone changed their mind and left. I shut the door, double-checked the lock, and went back to my chair. Not 5 minutes later, on the CCTV feed, I saw one of the big dryers slowly creak open. I sat up straight, watched it for a good 30 seconds. It swung wider. Dryers don't open themselves. I grabbed my flashlight and walked out into the main room. The rows of washers and dryers hummed as usual, the scent of stale detergent heavy in the air. When I reached the dryer I'd seen on the monitor, it was wide open. Inside was a crumpled hoodie, looked brand new, bright red. Not wet, not warm, just sitting there. I picked it up, half expecting a prank. That's when I noticed the tag was printed with words that made my stomach twist. Property of Sudsville. Return after use. I'd never seen company-branded clothing for a laundromat. And when I turned back to the machines, every dryer door along the row was open. I stood there clutching that bright red hoodie, my mind trying to make sense of why every dryer was suddenly open, as if something had crawled out of each one. A low mechanical hum filled the laundromat. Normal. But beneath it, I started to pick up something else. A faint whispering, almost like dozens of voices muttering at once. I backed away, heart hammering. The lights overhead flickered. On instinct, I turned to look at the office monitor. It was cycling through the cameras, but each feed was fuzzier than usual, streaks of static dancing across the screen. Then, clear as day on camera 4, which pointed right at the back wall, I saw a figure. It was standing between two washers. Tall. Too tall. Its limbs looked wrong, jointed in too many places. Long, wet strands of what might have been hair clung to its shoulders. It tilted its head, and I swear, even through the grainy footage, I could feel it looking straight at me. I bolted back to the office, hoodie still clutched in my hand. I slammed the door and locked it. The whispering grew louder, filling the tiny room like a chorus of breathless voices chanting just out of sync. Then the door handle started to jiggle, soft at first, then harder, like someone on the other side trying to twist it open. I pressed my back to the filing cabinet, eyes locked on that handle. Suddenly, it stopped. The whispering cut off all at once, leaving an echoing silence that felt worse than the noise. I didn't move for what felt like hours. Eventually, dawn's first pale light started seeping through the front windows. When Tasha showed up to open for the morning crowd, I nearly knocked her over running out. She found me sitting on the curb outside, shaking, unable to speak. Later, she told me there's been a long string of people who took that night shift job and quit within days. One of them, a guy named Jeff, had left behind a box in the back office. Inside, they found a journal, half filled with frantic writing about voices in the vents and something he called the Watcher in the Spin Cycle. Needless to say, I never went back to Sudsville, but sometimes I catch myself glancing at the dryers in my apartment building laundry room, half expecting to see a tall, too thin shadow crouched inside, waiting for someone like me to get desperate enough to work the night shift again. I'd never thought I'd end up working nights at a truck stop diner in Nebraska, but after the divorce, I needed a fresh start and a paycheck. Didn't matter where it came from. The place was a relic from the 60s, perched right off I-80. It had one of those neon cowboy signs flickering out front and a jukebox that only played old country songs. Most nights, it was me behind the counter and a short-order cook named Jimmy, who talked more to his hot plate than to people. At 1 a.m., the diner filled up with long-haul drivers, shift workers, and the occasional traveler looking for coffee before pushing on. Nothing much ever happened until last Thursday. It was around 2:30. Jimmy was in back prepping eggs for the morning rush, and I was wiping down the counter. A semi pulled up outside, blasting a low rumble through the walls. The driver came in, a big guy with gray stubble and hands like shovels. He nodded at me, slid into a booth, and ordered black coffee. I brought it over, and that's when I noticed the inside of his truck still running. Headlights beamed straight through the diner's front window, bathing everything in a weird glare. "Forgot to turn off your rig?" I joked. The man just stared at me, blinking slowly. "That's not my truck," he said in a hoarse voice. My stomach dropped. I turned back to the window. The truck was still idling out front, high beams glaring. "Someone just drove it up," I stammered. "You didn't?" He shook his head. "I walked here, parked a mile down, needed to stretch my legs." We both stood there, watching the lights. Then, like someone inside realized we were staring, the headlights shut off. The engine kept running for a few more seconds before choking and dying completely. Jimmy came out from the kitchen with a spatula in hand. "What's with you two? You look like you've seen a ghost." Before I could answer, the bell over the front door jingled, but no one came in. We waited. Nothing. I walked over, half expecting some kid playing pranks, but when I pushed open the door, cold night air hit me. Far colder than it should have been for early fall. Out by the idling truck, the cab door was hanging wide open. A light inside flickered weakly, illuminating the empty seats. That's when Jimmy said under his breath, "Look at the ground." There were tracks leading from the driver's side. Heavy boot prints at first, but after about 5 steps, they changed. Became shallow, dragging grooves in the dirt. Almost like something being pulled, or like someone crawling. Jimmy and I stood there side by side, peering into the dim lot. The truck's cab light still flickered, casting an unsteady glow on the dusty ground. The tracks led away from the truck, dragging lines through gravel and dirt. They stretched out toward the edge of the lot, disappearing into the tall grass beyond. The old driver, the one who'd come in for coffee, swallowed hard. "I don't like this. Never seen anything walk like that." I grabbed a flashlight from under the counter and, against every better instinct I had, started following the trail. Jimmy muttered curses behind me, but he still came along, gripping his spatula like it was a weapon. The trucker stayed back inside, watching us through the glass, wide-eyed. As soon as we stepped past the edge of the lot, the temperature seemed to plummet. The beam of my flashlight cut through a thin mist curling around our ankles. About 20 feet in, we found something. At first, I thought it was a bundle of clothes, but then it twitched. I knelt down and realized it was a man, or had been. His skin was pale, stretched tight over his bones, eyes sunk so deep they looked like empty pits. His shirt was shredded down the front, as if he'd clawed at himself trying to pull something off. Jimmy gagged. That's when the man's lips moved. Barely a whisper, Don't let it in." Then his body went limp, exhaling a final ragged breath that smelled of rot. I jumped back, heart slamming in my chest, and in that exact moment, we heard the bell over the diner's door jingle. Jimmy and I ran full tilt back across the lot. The truck was gone. Just vanished. No tire marks, no engine noise fading into the distance. Through the front windows, we could see the old trucker still sitting in his booth, gripping his coffee cup so tight his knuckles were white. But standing over him was another man. Impossibly tall, dressed in a stained long coat, wide-brimmed hat pulled low. The way he leaned over the table was all wrong, joints bending as though they were put together backward. I swung open the diner door, ready to yell, maybe even tackle the guy. But there was no one there, just the trucker, still frozen, staring across the table. "Where'd he go?" I demanded. The old driver blinked slowly. "Who?" He didn't remember anyone coming in, didn't even remember us leaving to follow the tracks. Jimmy quit the next day, took a job washing dishes in Lincoln. I stayed on for a couple more weeks, too broke to be picky, but every night I'd catch glimpses of movement out by the highway, a shape, sometimes crouched low, sometimes standing impossibly tall, always watching the neon cowboy sign like it was waiting for an invitation to come inside. I'd been broke for months, skipping rent payments and living off instant noodles when I finally landed a night shift at a small, independently run pet hospital outside Tucson. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid under the table, and the vet, Dr. Keller, seemed laid back. I wasn't a vet, tech, or anything, just the overnight caretaker. My job was to watch over the animals recovering from surgeries and call the emergency number if anything got bad. Easy money, I thought. The building itself was old, a squat little stucco place tucked behind a grocery store. At night, the parking lot was deserted, the only light coming from a buzzing lamp over the clinic door. Inside, the kennels lined 2 walls, stacked 3 high. Most nights it was quiet, except for the occasional whimper or scratch from the cages. My second weekend, Dr. Keller went on vacation, leaving me alone with just a stack of instructions and a number to call if there was a real crisis. Around midnight, I started hearing something odd. Not the usual restless shuffling or bark. This was softer. A kind of crying. I followed the sound down the rows of cages. Most of them were empty that night except for 2 dogs and a cat recovering from dental work. The sound led me to the very last kennel on the bottom row, a space that had been empty for days. I crouched down. The kennel was closed, locked, totally empty. But the crying was definitely coming from inside. It was quiet, almost like the sound of a baby, muffled behind the metal grate. A chill ran through me. I even opened the door to prove to myself it was empty. Nothing. The second I shut it again, the crying stopped. I was so rattled I called Julia, the day tech, to see if she'd ever experienced anything weird there. She laughed it off. "Oh, the old ghost stories? Yeah, people say the place is haunted by Dr. Kellar's first dog. Died on the table years ago. I think it's just the pipes. The building's ancient." Maybe she was right. But around 3 a.m., I was doing paperwork up front when I heard all the kennels at the back start rattling, like something was banging against them from the inside. I rushed down the hall, heart hammering. The cages were rocking back and forth, dogs barking frantically, claws scraping at the steel. Even the empty kennels were shuddering, and then it all stopped. In the sudden silence, I noticed something new. The kennel at the end of the row was ajar, the same one that had been empty. I stood there frozen, staring at that kennel door. It wasn't just ajar. It looked like it had been pushed open from the inside. The latch was bent outward, as if something had forced its way out. The barking started up again, all the dogs frantic, eyes wide and fixed on the floor between me and that open cage. Then the temperature dropped. In seconds, the air turned icy. I could see my breath puffing out in front of me. That's when I felt something brush past my leg. It wasn't a dog. It was too low, too cold, like a draft with weight. I spun around with my flashlight, sweeping it across the floor. Nothing, but the dog's eyes followed something moving slowly through the room toward the back door. Their heads turned in unison, hackles raised, some whining, others growling deep in their throats. I called Dr. Keller, hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped my phone. He picked up after a few rings, sounding groggy and irritated. When I told him what was happening, the cages, the cold, the crying, he didn't sound surprised, just very, very tired. "You opened the last kennel, didn't you?" It wasn't really a question. I checked it. It was empty, I stammered. He sighed heavily. "That's not for patients. I keep it locked for a reason. Stay in the front office. Don't follow it. I'll be there at sunrise." He hung up before I could ask what it was. The rest of the night was torture. I sat at the front desk with every light on, flashlight in my lap, jumping at every tiny noise. A couple times I heard claws skittering across the tile, but when I peeked around the corner, nothing was there. Finally, around 6 a.m., headlights swept through the front windows. Dr. Keller walked in, still in pajamas under his coat. He didn't say a word to me, just marched straight to the kennel at the end of the row. He bent down, whispering something low and urgent that I couldn't catch. Then he slammed the cage shut and secured it with a thick chain and padlock he must have brought from home. Afterward, he sat me down and handed me my paycheck in cash. "I appreciate your help," he said, "but I think it's best you don't come back. I'll handle nights from now on." I left without arguing. Sometimes, when I pass that old pet clinic on my way into town, I catch a glimpse through the side window. Just rows of cages. But once, I swear, I saw a small shape sitting calmly at the end of the hall, watching me with eyes that glowed faintly, even in daylight. I'd been working odd gigs for months, substitute teaching, some light construction, even handing out samples at grocery stores, when my buddy Ray told me about an overnight job that sounded almost too easy. A local funeral home, Mason & Sons, needed someone to keep watch overnight for a few weeks while the owner was out of town. The place had been hit by vandals twice in the past month, and they wanted a warm body there to deter any more break-ins. Ray was already working part-time there, prepping flowers and setting up chairs for viewings. He said it was boring, sure, but safe, so I took the job. The first night wasn't bad at all. I brought a thermos of coffee and a few horror novels to kill time. Mostly, I just sat at the receptionist's desk near the front door. The only unsettling part was the hush. Even with the overhead lights buzzing, there was a smothering quiet that seemed to press in from all sides. Every hour, I did a walk through like Ray had shown me, shining my flashlight down the main hallway that led past 3 small viewing rooms. On the third night, Ray stopped by around midnight with tacos. We ate in the break room, joking about how I was probably just being paid to babysit a bunch of empty caskets. But when we went back out to the main hall, the door to viewing room 2 was wide open. Ray frowned. "Thought you said you checked all these." "I did, 5 minutes ago. All were closed. Inside, the lights were off, so I swung my flashlight around. The beam landed on a coffin at the front of the room, a polished cherry box meant for a service the next day. The lid was open. Ray muttered, "Hell no," and reached for the wall switch. Light flooded the room. The coffin was empty. Now I was pretty sure it had arrived empty. This was just a display for tomorrow's flowers and seating. But Ray's face had gone sheet white. He pointed to the pale satin lining. There were long, dark smears, like something dirty or wet had been dragged across it. "Probably mud," I said, though my voice cracked. We shut the lid, locked up the room again, and decided to stay up front for the rest of the night. About an hour later, the smell hit us, a sour, coppery stench rolling through the hallway, and then, clear as day, we heard footsteps moving slowly down the carpet runner. Software, deliberate, coming from the viewing rooms. Ray grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. "You've got cameras, right?" he whispered. I nodded and pulled up the feed on the little monitor at the desk. The grainy black and white images showed empty hallways, but the footsteps kept coming. Then, on the camera facing the main door, we watched as the old brass handle slowly turned. Ray and I both froze, eyes locked on that tiny black and white monitor. The old brass handle on the front door kept twisting like someone was jiggling it from the outside, except the camera clearly showed no one there. Then it stopped. Silence returned, heavy and oppressive. Ray finally whispered, "Maybe it's the wind." But I could hear his heart pounding just as hard as mine. A minute later, we heard a soft click from down the hall, like a door latch releasing. The smell, that sour iron scent, rolled in stronger than ever. Ray whispered, "Man, we need to get out of here." I almost agreed, but something else was scratching at my mind. The funeral director, old Mr. Mason, had told me to call him if anything strange happened. At the time, I thought he meant kids throwing rocks or tagging the walls. I pulled out my phone and dialed his number, even though it was nearly 3 a.m. Surprisingly, he answered on the first ring. His voice was gravelly, and when I told him what was happening, the open coffin, the footsteps, the smell, there was a long pause on the line. Then he said, "Don't go anywhere. Stay together. I'm calling someone. Lock yourselves in the office." Ray didn't like that plan. He wanted to bolt. But something about Mason's voice made me stay put. So we locked the office door, pushed a filing cabinet in front of it, and waited. About 15 minutes later, we heard the front door actually open. Someone stepped inside. We could hear dress shoes clicking on tile. Through the crack of the office blinds, I saw a man in a dark suit. Not Mason. Taller, younger, carrying a small black leather case. He moved straight down the hall toward viewing room 2. Ray grabbed my shoulder. "Who the hell is that?" A moment later, we heard the faint sound of chanting. Low, almost like humming, in a language I didn't recognize. Then there was a heavy thump, like something being dropped back into a box. The smell started to fade. A minute later, we heard the man's footsteps retreating, and then the front door opened and shut. When we finally worked up the nerve to come out, the hallway smelled normal again. The door to viewing room 2 was shut. The lock turned tight. Ray quit the next day, packed up, moved to Boise to stay with family. He never answered my calls after that. As for me, Mason paid me generously to finish out the 2-week contract. I never saw that man in the dark suit again. But sometimes, when I'm half asleep, I think back to that open coffin and swear I hear something still shifting around inside it. I was living in a cramped studio apartment in Seattle, counting every dime just to keep the lights on. It had been months since I'd found steady work. Nothing stuck. I was close to giving up when my cousin Nate called out of the blue. He managed an overnight security contract for a massive self-storage facility on the edge of the city. The graveyard shift had chewed through 3 guys in 2 months, each one quitting after just a few nights. "Easy work, dude," Nate told me. "Sit in a booth, monitor the cameras, do a walk around every hour. Nobody ever breaks into a storage unit at 3 a.m. I was desperate enough to ignore how nervous he sounded. The place was called Cascade Lockup, a squat maze of concrete buildings stacked with metal doors. At night, the sodium lights gave everything a harsh orange glow. My first shift was quiet. Too quiet. I sat in the tiny office with its bank of old monitors, each showing a different row of storage units. Occasionally, a moth would drift by the security lights, but that was it. It wasn't until my second night that I realized why the other guys had bailed. It started with a single unit door slightly ajar on camera 3. Unit B12. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. I checked the log. No one was supposed to be there. I grabbed the flashlight, radioed Nate. He was home in bed, but company policy said, call your supervisor if you suspected a break-in, and made my way over. When I reached B12, the door was shut tight, locked. I ran the beam of light across the door, half expecting fresh scratches or a busted padlock. Nothing. As I turned to head back, I thought I saw movement at the far end of the aisle, a shape ducking behind a corner. "Hey!" I shouted. "This is private property." No answer. I walked all the way down. Empty. Back in the office, I replayed the feed. There it was, at exactly 2:14 a.m. The door to B12 swung open a few inches, then slowly shut. No one in sight. On my third night, Nate came by around midnight to drop off paperwork. He noticed I was pale, jittery, watching the monitors, like my life depended on it. "What's wrong with you?" He laughed, but it was forced. When I told him about B12, his smile vanished. "Yeah, don't worry about that one. Just keep an eye on the other rows." That didn't sit right. So naturally, around 3 a.m., I went back. This time, B12's lock was on the ground, split clean in half. The door hung open about a foot. A cold, rotten smell oozed out, like moldy earth and rust. I shone my flashlight inside. The beam cut through decades of dust, landing on what looked like an old trunk in the back. It was large, domed, with dark stains blooming across its lid. And then, I swear this is true, something inside the trunk scraped against the wood. I bolted, ran straight to the office, slammed the door, locked it. Tried to radio Nate, but all I got was static. Then, one by one, every camera feed went black. Except camera 3. B12. The door there was now fully open. The trunk was gone, and standing in the doorway was a person, or at least something shaped like one. Too tall, too thin, head tilted at an unnatural angle. Watching the camera. Watching me. I must have stared at that grainy monitor for a solid minute. My breath caught in my chest. The figure didn't move, didn't twitch. It just stood there in front of B12, head cocked like it was listening to something I couldn't hear. Then, so slowly, I almost missed it, it lifted one long, thin hand and pointed directly at the security camera. The screen went dark. I tried the radio again, voice cracking. "Nate, come in, please. Something's wrong here, man." Just static. My pulse thundered in my ears as I yanked open the office door, planning to sprint to my car and never look back. But out in the lot, parked right by the gate, was Nate's pickup. Relief crashed over me. I stumbled toward it, waving frantically. "Nate, you gotta see this!" No answer. As I got closer, I saw the driver's door was open. The cab was empty. Then I heard it. A faint scraping, the same sound I'd heard inside B12. It was coming from one of the nearby units. I should have left. Every cell in my body screamed to run, but some awful instinct drove me on, like I had to know. I turned the corner into row C and saw the trunk from B12 just sitting out in the middle of the asphalt, its lid yawning open. Inside, tangled in musty blankets, was Nate. His eyes were wide open, mouth working silently, like he was trying to form words. When I leaned closer, I realized he was mouthing one thing over and over. "It follows." Before I could drag him out, something slammed into me from behind. I hit the ground hard, cheek scraping against gravel. When I looked up, the figure from the monitor was standing over us. Even closer now, I could see its face, or where a face should have been. Just wrinkled, leathery skin stretched tight, no eyes, no nose, only a thin, lipless mouth. It bent toward me, mouth widening in a grotesque grin until all I could see was black. I woke up in the cab of Nate's truck. The sun was rising over the lot. The trunk was gone. B12 was padlocked like nothing ever happened. I stumbled inside to find my stuff neatly stacked on the desk, along with a termination notice and my final paycheck. I tried calling Nate dozens of times, but his number went straight to voicemail. When I drove by his house a week later, someone else was living there, said they'd never heard of a Nate who worked security. Sometimes, late at night, I dream I'm back in that storage yard, walking row after row, always ending up in front of B12, and inside, the trunk waits for me. I'd never planned to work the night shift at a rundown 24-hour diner on the edge of Albuquerque, but bills were piling up fast, and after my landscaping business tanked, I was willing to take anything. It was the kind of place that survived on truckers and drifters. Neon sign half burnt out, linoleum floors sticky no matter how often you mopped. I worked with Maribel, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who'd done nights there for almost a decade. She smoked menthols out back and called everyone Han. The first few weeks were uneventful, if you didn't count the occasional drunk staggering in at 3 a.m. or the weird regulars who nursed coffee for hours. Then came the guy with the blue duffel bag. It was just after 2:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was refilling napkin holders while Maribel counted the till. The place was empty, except for a lone semi parked by the far pumps. The man walked in stiffly, shoulders hunched, wearing an old army jacket, despite the heat. His eyes were hidden under the brim of a ball cap. He ordered black coffee and sat in the last booth by the windows. Nothing too weird, until I noticed he hadn't touched his coffee. He just kept staring out at the parking lot, fingers drumming on the blue duffel bag at his side. Probably tweaking, Maribel muttered, but she kept watching him too. Then the power flickered. The lights went off, then back on, buzzing louder than before. I laughed it off, but the guy in the booth stiffened, clutching the bag so hard his knuckles turned white. "Y'all ever lose power out here?" I asked Maribel quietly. "Only in dust storms. Ain't no storm tonight." A few minutes later, the stranger abruptly stood, leaving a crumpled 20 on the table, and walked out. But he left the duffel bag behind. "Hey, sir, your bag!" I shouted, running after him. But by the time I hit the door, the parking lot was empty. No truck, no man, just the distant hum of highway. Maribel poked the bag with a pen. "Don't open that. Could be a bomb, or drugs, or who knows." I wish we'd listened to her instincts, because curiosity, or maybe stupidity, won. I unzipped it just a couple inches and saw stacks of old photographs tied with twine, alongside something small wrapped in burlap that smelled like rotting meat. Suddenly, the power cut out completely. The diner plunged into darkness. I heard Maribel swear, then the tinkle of a coffee cup shattering somewhere near the counter. Then, through the big front windows, I saw shapes moving. Figures, dozens of them, just standing in the parking lot, silhouettes under the sickly glow of the remaining neon, all staring right at us. For a few seconds, I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, the way the neon blinked and threw shadows. Maybe it was just reflections. But Maribel saw them too. Her breath hitched, and she gripped my arm so hard her nails dug in. Then the figures started moving closer, slowly, as if testing how far they could come before we ran. I scrambled behind the counter and grabbed the old flashlight we kept for power outages. The beam was weak, but when I shone it out the window, the light caught on faces. Slack, gray faces, eyes sunken deep into hollow sockets. Maribel started praying under her breath. We backed toward the kitchen. I didn't even think about the duffel bag until something heavy hit the front door. It was like a battering ram. The glass cracked. Then again, this time spiderwebbing all the way across. We bolted into the kitchen, slammed the swinging door, and pushed a prep table in front of it. The air was thick with the smell of fryer oil and raw onions, but underneath that, I caught a whiff of something damp and moldy. That's when we heard voices, faint, echoing, like they were coming from underwater, chanting words I couldn't understand. Maribel was clutching the little cross around her neck. "I've worked here 10 damn years," she whispered. "Ain't never seen anything like this." Suddenly, a horrible thought hit me. The bag. I turned the flashlight back on and rummaged through the photos inside. They were old, black and white, curling at the edges. Each showed groups of people standing outside this diner. Some dated all the way back to the 50s, before it even had its neon sign. And in every photo, no matter the year, there was at least one person whose face was nothing but a smear, like it had been wiped away or never existed. At the bottom of the bag was the burlap bundle. I unwrapped it with shaking hands. Inside was a dried-up piece of something. I don't know if it was animal or human, with strange symbols carved into the flesh. It smelled like grave dirt. The chanting outside grew louder. Maribel grabbed the thing from me and hurled it into the deep fryer. The oil exploded in a roar of flame and the kitchen lights flickered back on. When we burst through the swinging door, the parking lot was empty. No figures, no chanting, nothing. Just the burnt, oily smoke filling our lungs and the sense that we'd narrowly escaped something we weren't meant to understand. I quit that job the next morning. Maribel stayed on, said she needed the money. 3 weeks later, she was found in her car behind the diner, eyes wide open, mouth stretched in a silent scream. The coroner said heart attack, but I think whatever was in that bag, whatever was tied to this place for decades, wasn't done with her yet.